Welcome to the Social Media Church Podcast. I'm Neil Smith, joined by my good friend Katie Allred. Katie, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nils. I appreciate it.
So, for the two people that are listening to this podcast that don't know who you are, you've worn through the years many hats. How would you describe who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm definitely a Jill of all trades, I guess. I've done a little bit of everything, and now I work for a large tech company. You may have heard of it. I'm not even gonna say what it is. You can Google it if
You
you're
can
really
Google and you'll
interested.
find out.
Yeah, feel free.
Yes, but it's
But
not Google, so I'll give you a hint. It's not Google.
but in the past, I have worked as a professor, and then before that, I worked at a church for many years, and before that, I worked at a university in IT. So I have worn many hats, and I was just telling Nils that I was thinking about taking up dentistry. So
Yeah, and I, for those that are concerned about Katie leaving this space and taking up dentistry, I have talked her off the ledge for now. I don't know that I've really talked her off the ledge, but I've tried
I'm still pretty
to talk her
interested
off
in
the ledge.
dentistry. So I don't
Okay,
know.
I mean we all didn't. People will always need their
Dentist.
teeth
That's what I
fixed.
said. I was like, people are always going to need dentists. Like that could
You
be
know,
you.
I'm a believer that robotics is going to solve that and replace dentists, but I'll let you choose
A
your own path.
robot in there.
Think about all the times that you've gone to the dentist and they're cleaning your teeth and then all of a sudden they poke the gums wrong. The
Yeah,
robot's going to do a much
don't
better
you think
job.
a robot would be worse?
No, because a robot is precise. The precision of a robot. The eyes are
Oh,
way
I don't
better
know,
than
man.
our
This
human
is what this new
limitations.
podcast is about. It's about
This
robot
is
industry.
this is the conversation for today. Katie has also written the book on church communications. So if you've not read that and you're listening to this podcast, you need to just pause, go to Amazon, buy the book. And it's just it's the textbook on church communications. And every church, and no matter what your role, you need to learn how to better communicate. So it is a foundational read for no matter what, if you're a senior pastor, if you're a youth pastor, if you're a comms director, you need to read that book. But today we're going to veer around church communications. But Kitty, you and I were having a conversation before this, and I grew up in a household with a single mom and a sister, and now I'm in a household with my wife and two daughters. So I am used to being
You've just
the
been
only man, and
surrounded by women.
yeah, surrounded by women, and what I have seen is women that have done incredible things. My mom worked her way through, got her PhD, and is now a PhD psychologist. My sister is a powerhouse. I don't even know what so she leads online women's ministries,
Yeah.
author of several books, and I see the incredible things. And my wife, and I have a podcast and does just great. She does great things at our church here in New York. But I am a believer in empowering women, and I think the church has often limited the role of women in the church. And we're not here to have a theological debate about women in ministry and things like that. But I think regardless of your theology of women in ministry, we can do a better job of empowering women. And one of the things I've heard, Katie, from my sister, just to tee up this conversation, is she gets tired of when she offers to volunteer at church or a church that she's new to, basically being put into a volunteer secretary role because she's
Yeah.
a woman.
You can
So
cook.
what's that?
Or you can cook.
Or you could cook, and I think that that's real
You
though.
can take care of children. You can take notes. Or you can cook. That's kind of like, that's it.
So this is a historical problem, but I think there are new opportunities, and I'm curious from your seat, how would you see churches better even approaching empowering women, even in volunteer roles, but also in staff roles?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. We have She Leads Church coming up this next month, and during Women's month. So we
Yeah,
love to celebrate women at church communications, mostly because I founded it. So
it's a good reason.
I have felt this since I was a young kid. I think, when I was 12, I said, I feel called to be a pastor. And my pastor told me that couldn't be true.
Yeah,
That I could be a pastor's wife. And so I was like, okay. So I saw other means of serving the church. And
Yeah.
then eventually did find exactly what God was calling me to, which definitely was not pastoring. Um, but it was really disheartening. I think. I remember going home and like crying, about
Yeah.
it, and just being really upset. My brother actually, it was funny at the time. My brother was dating a girl whose mom was a pastor,
Yeah.
and she sent him home with a book called "Why Not Women,"
Mm.
and it's an old book. I think it was written like, well, not old, but old by my standard, I guess. It was like written in the like 90s, early 2000s,
Yeah.
and just talked about all like the different biblical reasons like women should be in ministry and should be in
Yeah.
leadership. And I realized, oh, I can just think differently.
Yes.
And so I decided, I was like, I'm not going to argue about it, but I'm just going to do what God's called me to do and just continue to answer what God's calling me to answer. So, but when it comes to like specifically how can we help more churches and more women, I think here's the thing. And I love how like Katie Cole put it. If you haven't read her book, Developing Female Leaders in the Church, I recommend reading it. It's a great read for anyone with any theological belief about women in the church, because she really was like, you've got to articulate where the line is. Like,
Mm.
what do you believe women are capable of doing in the church? If it's everything but preaching,
Yeah.
like, so they can be an executive pastor and help make decisions
Yes.
financially for the church, or they can be, an operational minister and help, operationally oversee facilities and those kind of things. We've got women in churches that are doctors and lawyers and
Yes.
work in major tech companies.
Yes.
And the only thing you've allowed them to do is to, and well, not even just allowed them to do, but you've told them that they can do is cook or clean
Yeah.
or write notes. I think they will, women especially will rise to the occasion that that we don't want to like rock the boat. I
Yes.
think that's it more than
Yeah.
anything. I mean, sometimes we do, but for the most part, like we really just want to like go along, and there's been a long standing tradition of this is what is expected of women at church. And
Yeah.
so if you don't articulate that, hey, you could serve in this capacity as an
Yeah.
executive pastor, then they're not going to rise to that occasion, right?
Yeah.
So like you might have a woman in your church who's been a vice president of a bank for several years who might actually be a great fit as
Yeah.
an executive pastor.
Yeah.
And unless you tell her that the opportunity could be for her, she's probably not going to think the opportunity's for her.
Yeah.
And so, and maybe you do believe, women can preach and they should, but if you don't, that's fine. If you're not articulating exactly where women can rise to, they're never going to rise to it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just making that abundantly clear for your congregation exactly who can serve in these roles and should be serving in these roles. Otherwise, they're not going to, rise most of the time. It's kind of like how I feel about community standards, or like when I think about like an online community, people in social media, even like they won't do what you don't tell them to do.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
people online will only do what you tell them to do, essentially. So like if you don't tell them you want them to, share or whatever, not necessarily engagement bait, but like if you don't tell them exactly how you want them to act in like an online community, they're not going to act that way, like by posting new pictures of themselves every week, or introducing themselves or whatever. And so I think it's the same thing, like putting these kind of boundaries and expectations really does help, and like redefining what that looks like for your church.
Yeah. So let's talk about that practically around church communications. If you're stepping into a new role as a communications director, and you're basically creating volunteer opportunities or engagement opportunities, where would you begin if a woman says, "Hey, I'd love to help out"? How do you approach her to effectively empower her in that ministry?
Yeah, I think by one, making sure she has the tools that she needs, and then two, telling her that she has the autonomy and the power that she needs. I think that, people are only going to rise to exactly what you tell them to do, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't tell them like, hey, like you have the authority to post more than what we've done in the past.
Yeah.
You have the authority to come up with new ideas.
Yes.
You can do this without asking me that you can do this. Or
Yeah.
like, or even like saying, you have a budget and this is what your budget is, so that they're
Yeah.
not having to ask for a budget. I think
Yeah.
giving them some of those guidelines beforehand
Yeah.
helps them be more creative. I mean,
Yeah.
now will they like want some guidance? Of course, but like
Yeah.
I think giving them an idea of some expectations beforehand is really critical for their success.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Anything, I mean, is there a way that you, and maybe even for male, uh, leaders, how should they communicate differently to women than they do men? Because I think a lot of what I hear is there's a lot of things that we need to actually treat them more similarly to how we treat women, or how we treat men, or communicate to men. What are there any ways that we should differentiate that communication?
Yeah, I think being overly specific would be helpful, not because you necessarily have to, but because I think that there's been this expectation of not rising, of not being thought of as capable. And
Yeah.
so I think, being challenging is helpful. Giving some like those expectations, like I said, is really helpful. And defining that, anything is possible is
Yeah.
helpful. If you
Yeah.
give them some mission and vision and tell them like, I want you to be able to think, and let's brainstorm together, and like I want
Yeah.
you to be a thought partner and come
Yeah.
alongside me in this, not
Yeah.
I just expect you to do this and I expect you to do it the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
um then I think that would be really helpful. I mean, regardless, honestly, if you're a man or or a woman
Yeah.
doing this job, especially if it's for the first time, I feel like having that authority is so helpful, because if you don't have it, it's really hard to do your job as a communicator.
That's so good. I mean, I think that clearing the definitions of authority and empowering women
Yeah,
with authority, with clearly defined authority,
right.
is important, because oftentimes I think there's an assumption made that either the
But I
assumption
gave
is
you the
made that,
job. You have authority,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
I mean, you have all the authority you want. Like I think that's like what people. It
yeah,
feels like some other things in life that we think about. Like clearly, I gave you this job, so therefore you have the authority.
yeah,
Like, don't you know? And then
yes,
like there's some expectation. You're both getting let down, right? Because
yes,
you think, oh, I gave you all the authority in the world. However, they think, oh, I have all the authority up to a certain level of what has been done before, right?
yes,
Like what is expected and how it's
yes,
expected to be done. And
yes,
maybe you got hired to do things differently than what was expected. And
yeah,
so articulating, I have hired you to do things differently. I have hired you with the authority that you can blank slate this, come at it from a totally different angle. Like, I think giving them that is more important than necessarily anything else you can give them. It's just
yeah,
giving them the authority.
yes, yes. So let's maybe go down the other path of the Billy Graham rule in churches. And Billy Graham rule is, I think it's often defined as like, you don't go to lunch, you don't have a meal, or you don't have to go to a private closed door with a woman. But that's not crossed over into technology of, you shouldn't text a woman, you shouldn't DM a woman as a man, or vice versa. How
You'd be in
should
trouble, Niels.
how should how should male and female, church leaders interact with the opposite sex from your perspective? And how do you have kind of open communication with healthy accountability and restriction? How do you approach that? I think this is a gray area for different people, but it's complicated in
I don't know.
this
I feel like
technology
the
age.
number one rule should just be don't be weird.
Don't be weird. That's good number. Rule number one: don't be
Just
weird.
don't be weird.
Yes.
I don't know. It's so funny. Like when people, I don't know. I don't think it was so much that's great. I'm a single woman. I haven't like, and I've had business partners that are men, that are married
Yeah.
men, and I've been alone with them. I've been alone with church leaders that are single and married men. I've been alone, and like the thing is, like it's not weird unless you make it weird. At least that's how I feel about it. And
Yeah.
so I don't feel like I feel like the Billy Graham rule is such an overreach of your authority, like you're upending that, like you and I cannot be trusted
Yeah.
together. Because at the end of the day, we're just animals or something. That's absolutely ridiculous, I think. And so because that's just not the case. Like, and so I think we can all be trusted. Now, I think, if somebody makes it weird, then it's weird.
Yeah.
Then it has officially become weird. And
Yes.
at the point that has happened, the trust is over, right? And
Yeah.
I think at that point, like we can set some rules. Maybe the Billy Graham rule is a good rule for you've already made it weird.
Yeah.
But when it hasn't been weird and it's not going to be, I feel like let's trust each other. Let's put that in the professional business world,
Yeah.
that this is not a case, and it's really often a case of holding women back in spaces where they need to be heard. And churches are like what 60 to 80% women,
Yeah.
and all these decisions are often being made by men because they're afraid of having a woman in the room. But why? Like, why
Yeah.
are we afraid of having a woman in the room? I don't know. Like, can we all just not be weird? That would be great. I don't know. That's my whole rule, I guess, for that.
That's good. I think it's a great perspective where I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions around this. And I think, I do think starting with like, just let's start by not being weird. I think, where my wife and I, and you and I have had meals together. And I remember talking to my wife like, hey, I'm in Alabama, and, I'm going to go to dinner with Katie. You good with that? And she's like, of course. But we have open dialogue about it. And I think there are times and opportunities where it is transparent. It's open. It's when I think you get into hidden communication, things like that. And I think to your point of I'm defining that may be different than weird, but it is weird. That's weird when you start doing that.
Right. Like, and I don't want to disappoint anyone, right? Like, I think we even talked a little bit about that. Like, so it's not like, no one knows Ray. I don't know. Like, my mom knows Ray. I don't know. It's so funny. Like, I'm not like going to disappoint my mom. I also love Jesus. Like, these are all things that are really important to me. So, like, I don't feel like, as long as we're like both above board, we're both like not being weird about it, then what's the point? Like, we're here for a certain reason. We have a good friendship. We have a good relationship. We're learning. We're building things together. And so and we're building the kingdom together. Like, we can't build the kingdom without each other. That's the thing.
Yes.
Like, I think we're all trying to build a kingdom without each other, without the other gender, and that is disappointing. It just doesn't work. Like, I think Jesus first went to women to help build the kingdom intentionally, because he was a single man going to single women saying, hey, I need your help to build this thing. It's not going to work otherwise. And so and he didn't make it weird. There was no Billy Graham rule with like Jesus and, Mary and Martha. Like, he went and stayed at their homes by himself all the time, or along his travels. It said that he frequented their home. And so it's just, I don't know. I think it's interesting that we got in the last 20, it feels like a recent issue to me more than it, I don't know. Maybe it was always an issue. I guess things have changed too, but
yeah. I think it's a recent issue because I think we're just now opening up to empowering women. And I would say it's an issue because we're still figuring out how do we do this effectively. And it honestly, it's easier if we just create a box and create real hard lines that we can't navigate around. But that's what that does, is that actually suppresses people. And that puts a lid on, I think, how you can effectively empower people. So I think my stance, but I think there's different listeners who are going to have lots of different opinions.
People are going to have so many feelings, Neil.
It's navigating a tension here. And I think at the end of the day, I hope this conversation brings tension to our audience and just begins to just challenge, how can we better empower women, and what are some of our chances are going to be, and are we going to hold the Billy Graham, like what are some of our lines going to be? But I think at the end of the day, I think we always want the conversations in this podcast to
Yeah.
push leaders. And if you're going to push things forward at your church, that's going to be better empower. You've got to get better at empowering women. And it's something that I believe every church has struggled with, no matter how liberal or conservative or Baptist or Pentecostal you might be. This is a struggle for every single church that I have ever been around. And so I think it's a significant opportunity to just be more intentional and be more thoughtful, and always like, how can we do this better and more? Because whatever progress you've made, you probably have more progress you can make still.
Yeah, and Niels, like on that note, I grew up in a very conservative church in Alabama, in rural Alabama.
Yes.
And I told you obviously about my pastor saying that, but at the same time, there was a deacon at that church who discipled me, who intentionally discipled me and spent time with me every week. And, we were in the middle of the church gym. Like, obviously, we were somewhere where we could be seen. But, like, if a 12-year-old Katie hadn't met a 65-year-old John who taught her everything he knew about the Bible and poured into her, like, everything he knew about, like, Jesus and every question, because I had so many questions I was so inquisitive. I wanted to know about everything. I was asking about predestination, as a 12-year-old, and I just was like ready to like learn deeper than what I was getting fed in a Sunday school class, right? Like in a regular class or on a Sunday morning. And if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't be who I am today. And I think about that often. Like, first off, discipleship at a lot of churches that's a whole different podcast. We can talk about that one. Where it's not like really what Jesus intended, right? Like, where it was a one-on-one relationship that was very intentional.
Yeah.
And I had that one-on-one relationship, and it just happened to be with an older man. And I'm so, so grateful for him still to this day. He owns a furniture store. He's not he didn't go to like theological seminary or anything, but he took the time to answer my questions and to help me find those answers in the Bible, and helped me understand how I can do my own research and come to my own conclusions and stand on my own 2 feet with the knowledge that I have. And that was really incredible for someone, for a girl especially. And so I'm just so grateful that he was that person. Now, I don't think that made him brave. I mean, he had a daughter. He was a regular guy. Like, I don't think he was trying to do anything like wild or like liberal or anything like that. I think he just saw a need and met it,
Yeah. That's awesome. This is good. This is a good conversation. I think there's so many, we could talk about it all day, and go down a lot of different paths. But Katie, thank you for leaning into what can be a challenging conversation, and something that a lot of us have a lot of disagreements about, so we just avoid it. And so I think it's an important conversation, even for a podcast that mostly talks about technology and social media. Integrates into that, and I think even we could go down a path of technology and how women need to be more engaged and empowered in the technology space as well. But we'll keep it to the church for today. Katie, two things. Any final thoughts you want to share with church leaders? And then if church leaders want to connect with you online, where can they find you online?
Yeah, final thoughts. Trying to think. Yeah, I was also thinking about like tech and church and women, and I was so grateful that, early on in my church, they gave me a lot of media roles. They gave me a lot of opportunities to serve, even when they didn't think I should be a pastor or something like that. They gave me so many opportunities to serve otherwise. And what was great is that eventually that church did like license me to ministry. So I do want to hear like them see that there was a journey in that, like God was doing something in my life, and they felt like they would get in my way if they didn't do these things. So I thought that was a really quite a journey of walking with an individual too, not just because of my gender, but because of who I was and what God was doing in my life. But if you want to connect with me, you can go to churchcommunications.com. You can always go to katieallred.com. You can follow me on Instagram. It's Katie J. Allred, because I felt like that was just strong, Katie J. Allred. And you can find me on all the major social platforms.
There you go. Google, and you'll find her, and you'll find the book. So go find that. Katie, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today. And thanks, everyone, for listening. We will talk to you again on the next episode.